500,000 years of frozen slumber shattered in an instant as Eugene Griffin's cryopod hissed open, releasing him into a world far removed from the one he once knew. His muscles atrophied, his mind reeling from the impossible awakening, he stumbled out into an alien place and time. The architecture around him was unfamiliar. Sleek curves of unknown alloys lit by the sickly green glow of bioluminescent panels. Memories surged back, unbidden. Earth once vibrant and green, now a charred husk beneath roiling storm clouds. Desperate evacuation ships had fled into the void, wormholes collapsing, scattering ships across the cosmos. Then came the lurch of drive failure, the wail of proximity alarms, and the hiss of cryogas as Eugene's pod, one of several, went dark. Now he found himself among other survivors, each as disoriented and lost as he was, cast adrift in the unforgiving currents of space and time. As they huddled together, blinking in the harsh light, Eugene's natural leadership instincts took over. He stepped forward, his voice ringing with authority, commanding them to take stock of their surroundings, gather resources, and establish a base of operations. The alien architecture, once so foreign and daunting, became a puzzle to be solved, a fortress to be commandeered for their survival. However, the world outside was not empty. It was a battlefield, a remnant of a war that had raged on in their absence. As they explored further, they encountered remnants of alien civilizations, some hostile, others as lost as they were. It became clear that their awakening was no mere accident, but was tied to a looming galactic threat, one that would require all of Eugene's ingenuity, resilience, and the advanced alien technology they had stumbled upon. The first encounters with alien species were tense, fraught with mistrust, but necessity forced them into uneasy alliances. As they prepared to defend themselves from an approaching alien force, Eugene realized that humanity's survival depended not just on their strength, but on their ability to adapt, to forge alliances, and to harness the very alien technology that had once seemed so strange. War was inevitable, and it erupted with a ferocity that shook the remnants of humanity to their core. Eugene's leadership was tested as they fought not just for survival, but for a place in this new era. The final battles were fierce, with humanity caught in the crossfire of a conflict that spanned galaxies. Yet, through sheer determination and the strength of their newfound alliances, they managed to survive, emerging not as the dominant force they once were, but as a resilient, adaptive race ready to carve out a new future. As the dust settled and the threat was finally neutralized, Eugene and his people looked out over the alien landscape, not with fear, but with a renewed sense of purpose. They had awoken to a world that was no longer theirs alone, but they had survived, and now they would rebuild. The new dawn of humanity was not the end of their story, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where they would once again rise, stronger and wiser, in a galaxy that had almost forgotten their name. As the remnants of humanity began to organize themselves in this strange new world, the challenges they faced only grew more complex. The alien allies, though crucial to their survival, brought with them a myriad of cultural differences and political intricacies that threatened to fracture the fragile coalition Eugene Griffin had managed to assemble. The technology they had discovered, while advanced, was also dangerously unpredictable, with many of its functions still a mystery. Eugene, now the de facto leader of the human survivors, found himself constantly balancing the immediate needs of his people with the long-term goal of securing a place for humanity in this unfamiliar galaxy. Every decision he made felt like it was on a knife's edge, with the potential to either solidify their tenuous alliances or unravel them completely. Meanwhile, the planet they had landed on, though rich in resources, was teeming with life forms that ranged from the curious to the deadly. The survivors had to quickly learn how to defend themselves against these new threats, all while trying to maintain the morale of a group that had been through unimaginable trauma. Tensions began to rise as the true extent of their predicament became clear. The alien species that had initially welcomed them began to show signs of doubt, questioning the wisdom of aligning themselves with a species that had been dormant for so long and was still so weak in comparison to the interstellar powers that surrounded them. Rumors spread of a brewing conflict within the Alliance, as some factions began to see humanity as a liability rather than an asset. Eugene knew that the only way to keep the coalition intact was to prove that humanity could be more than just survivors. They had to become leaders once again. With this in mind, he threw himself into understanding the alien technology, spending long hours with Dr. Wright, the most knowledgeable scientist among the survivors, to unlock its secrets. They made remarkable progress, discovering ways to enhance their weapons and defenses far beyond what they had been capable of on Earth. But with each new discovery came new dangers. The power they were now wielding was vast and not fully understood, and it wasn't long before a catastrophic accident nearly wiped out their entire camp. A prototype energy shield, designed to protect them from the increasingly aggressive wildlife, malfunctioned and nearly tore the fabric of space itself, creating a rift that threatened to engulf the entire area. It took every ounce of Eugene's leadership and the quick thinking of his team to avert disaster. But the incident left a deep scar on the survivors. Trust in the new technology was shaken, and with it, trust in Eugene's leadership. It was clear that the road ahead would not be easy, and that they would need to tread carefully to avoid further catastrophe. Despite these setbacks, Eugene refused to give up. He knew that the survival of humanity depended on their ability to adapt, to learn from their mistakes, and to forge a new path forward. He convened a council of the most trusted leaders among the survivors and their alien allies, laying out a plan for the future. They would continue to develop and refine the alien technology, but with strict safeguards in place to prevent any further accidents. At the same time, they would begin to explore the surrounding galaxy, seeking out new allies and resources that could help them in their struggle. The first step was to establish a new home base, one that was far enough away from their current location to be safe from any lingering effects of the energy shield malfunction, but close enough to maintain contact with their allies. The search for this new home took them deep into uncharted territories, where they encountered wonders and horrors beyond anything they had ever imagined. They found planets with ecosystems so alien that they defied understanding, and ancient ruins that hinted at civilizations far older and more advanced than anything humanity had ever known. But they also found dangers. Hostile alien species that saw them as invaders, and remnants of the same galactic war that had nearly destroyed them before. These encounters tested the limits of their technology and their resolve, but each time they emerged stronger and more united. Finally, after months of searching, they found a planet that seemed perfect. A lush, green world with abundant resources and no signs of intelligent life. It was as if the planet had been waiting for them, a paradise in the midst of a chaotic galaxy. The survivors quickly set to work establishing a new settlement, using everything they had learned to create a place where humanity could thrive once again. The alien allies, impressed by their determination and resilience, began to see them not as a burden, but as a valuable partner in the struggle to bring peace and stability to the galaxy. Eugene, though exhausted from the constant challenges, felt a renewed sense of hope as he looked out over the growing settlement. For the first time since they had awoken from cryo sleep, he allowed himself to believe that they might actually succeed in building a new future for humanity. But even as they celebrated their progress, Eugene knew that the true test was still to come. The galaxy was a dangerous place, filled with powers that would not take kindly to a new player on the field. And then there were the shadows of the past, enemies who had not forgotten humanity's role in the galactic war and who would stop at nothing to ensure that they never rose to power again. As he stood on the edge of the settlement, watching the sun set on their new home, Eugene vowed that whatever the future held, he would face it head-on. Humanity had been given a second chance, and he was determined not to let it slip through their fingers. The road ahead would be long and fraught with danger, but with courage, ingenuity, and the strength of their new alliances, Eugene believed that they could not only survive but thrive in this new era. The dawn of humanity had come again, and this time they would rise to meet the challenge. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the settlement on their new homeworld began to take shape, transforming from a hastily assembled encampment into a thriving community. The survivors worked tirelessly, drawing on their combined knowledge and the advanced technology at their disposal to build a society that was both resilient and adaptable. The alien allies contributed their expertise as well, sharing knowledge of agriculture, medicine, and energy production that was far beyond anything humanity had known before. Together, they built a city that rose up from the lush landscape, a beacon of hope and determination in a galaxy that was often hostile and unforgiving. Despite the progress, Eugene Griffin could not shake the feeling that they were still on borrowed time. The galaxy was vast, and while they had made a good start, they were still a small and vulnerable presence in an uncertain universe. News of their settlement had spread, and while many alien species were content to leave them be, others were not so welcoming. Reports began to trickle in of fleets moving on the fringes of their territory, of strange vessels appearing and then disappearing without a trace. The settlers remained vigilant, knowing that any day could bring the threat of invasion or worse. Eugene spent much of his time in the command center, coordinating with his advisors and the alien allies to bolster their defenses. The energy shield that had nearly destroyed them in the early days had been refined and perfected, now a critical component of their planetary defense system. They had also developed new weapons, fusing human ingenuity with alien technology to create formidable tools of war. But even as they prepared for conflict, Eugene knew that they could not rely on military might alone. They needed allies, and they needed them fast. The search for allies took Eugene and his team to the far reaches of the galaxy, to places where human feet had never tread before. They encountered species that were strange and beautiful, as well as those that were terrifying in their otherworldliness. Some were willing to listen, intrigued by the idea of forming a new alliance with the survivors of a long-forgotten war. Others were more cautious, wary of the potential consequences of aligning themselves with a species that had been dormant for 500,000 years. And then there were those who were openly hostile, seeing humanity as a threat that needed to be eliminated before it could grow too powerful. Negotiations were tense and often fraught with danger. Eugene and his team had to navigate a complex web of galactic politics, where even the slightest misstep could lead to disaster. They had to prove themselves not just as survivors, but as potential leaders in a galaxy that had seen its share of war and betrayal. It was a delicate balancing act, requiring every ounce of diplomacy and strategic thinking they could muster. But slowly they began to make progress. Alliances were forged, trade agreements were signed, and for the first time since their awakening, Eugene began to feel that they might actually have a chance. Back on their homeworld, life continued to evolve. The settlement grew into a bustling city, with new buildings and infrastructure springing up almost daily. Schools were established, where the children of the survivors learned not just the history of Earth, but also the knowledge of their alien allies. A new generation was being born, one that had never known the old Earth, but was instead growing up in a world where humans and aliens lived and worked side by side. It was a world filled with possibilities, but also with challenges that the settlers were only beginning to understand. As the years passed, the settlers became more integrated with their alien neighbors, their cultures blending in ways that were both surprising and enriching. They adopted new customs and traditions, even as they held on to the ones that reminded them of their lost home. Festivals were held, celebrating not just the survival of humanity, but also the newfound unity between species that had once been strangers to each other. The bonds that were formed in those early days of cooperation would prove to be the foundation of something much greater, a new civilization, one that was stronger and more diverse than anything humanity had ever known. But even as they celebrated their progress, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. The alliances that Eugene and his team had worked so hard to build were being tested, as old rivalries and new threats began to surface. Rumors spread of a powerful force rising in the galaxy, one that was determined to subjugate or destroy any who opposed it. The settlers knew that they could not face this threat alone, and so they redoubled their efforts to strengthen their alliances and prepare for the coming storm. Eugene found himself once again at the center of it all, trying to hold together a coalition that was beginning to show signs of strain. He knew that the survival of humanity depended on their ability to stand united, but he also knew that unity was fragile and could be shattered in an instant. Every decision he made felt like a gamble, with the stakes higher than ever before. But Eugene was not one to back down from a challenge. He had led his people through the darkest days of their existence, and he was determined to lead them through whatever came next. As the first signs of conflict began to appear, Eugene called together the leaders of the allied species for a summit. They met in a grand hall, constructed specifically for this purpose, where the walls were adorned with symbols of each species' history and culture. The discussions were intense, as each leader voiced their concerns and demands. There were heated arguments, moments of doubt, and even threats of withdrawal. But through it all, Eugene remained steadfast, using every bit of his leadership and diplomacy to keep the coalition together. The summit ended with a renewed commitment to their alliance, but Eugene knew that it was only the beginning. The threat they faced was real and growing stronger by the day. The galaxy was on the brink of war, and humanity, along with its allies, would soon be called to defend their hard-won peace. Eugene returned to his homeworld with a heavy heart, knowing that the challenges ahead would test them all in ways they could not yet imagine. But he also knew that they had something that no enemy could take from them: their resolve, their ingenuity, and their unbreakable will to survive. As he stood on the balcony of his command center, looking out over the city they had built, Eugene made a silent vow. No matter what the future held, he would do whatever it took to protect his people and their new home. They had come too far and sacrificed too much to fail now. The dawn of humanity's new era was at hand, and Eugene was ready to lead them into the light, no matter how dark the night ahead might be. The war was coming, but this time humanity would not face it alone. They were part of something greater now, a coalition of species united by a common purpose. And together, they would fight for their place in the galaxy, and for the future they had all worked so hard to build. As the threat of war loomed ever closer, the settlers on their new homeworld began to shift their focus from mere survival to preparation for the inevitable conflict. The once bustling city, full of hope and promise, now took on the air of a fortress, with defenses being bolstered and military drills becoming a daily routine. Eugene Griffin, the leader who had guided humanity through their awakening, found himself consumed by the demands of leadership, spending long hours in the command center, coordinating with their alien allies and planning for every possible scenario. The alliance they had forged, though strong, was not without its tensions. Different species had different priorities, and not all were eager to be dragged into a full-scale war. Eugene knew that maintaining unity among such diverse cultures was his greatest challenge. The memories of Earth's old alliances, fragile and often short-lived, haunted him. He was determined not to repeat those mistakes, but the weight of responsibility was immense. Every decision he made could mean the difference between victory and annihilation. Meanwhile, intelligence reports from the far reaches of the galaxy painted a grim picture. The rising power that threatened them was relentless, expanding its influence and crushing any opposition with brutal efficiency. Their fleet was vast, their technology advanced, and their soldiers fanatical in their loyalty. It became clear that this was not just a threat to humanity, but to all free species in the galaxy. The time for diplomacy had passed now. It was a matter of survival. Eugene called for a war council, bringing together the best minds from each allied species. The council chamber was a grand room, its walls lined with holographic displays showing tactical maps, fleet movements, and intelligence briefings. The air was thick with tension as the leaders of the various species took their seats, each one representing a piece of the fragile alliance. Eugene stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding, but his expression grim. "We all know why we're here," Eugene began, his voice steady but filled with a sense of urgency. "The threat we face is unlike anything we've encountered before. They have the numbers, they have the technology, and they have the will to destroy everything we've built. But we have something they don't: unity. If we stand together, if we fight as one, we can stop them." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Then, one by one, the leaders voiced their support, each pledging their resources and soldiers to the cause. But Eugene could see the doubt in their eyes, the fear that this alliance might not be enough. He knew that words alone would not be enough to hold them together. They needed a plan, a strategy that would give them a fighting chance. Over the next several days, the War Council worked tirelessly, crafting a strategy that would utilize the strengths of each species. The humans, with their ingenuity and adaptability, would take the lead in developing new weapons and tactics. The alien allies, with their advanced technology and deep knowledge of the galaxy, would provide the firepower and logistical support. Together, they would form a force capable of standing against the coming onslaught. As the preparations continued, Eugene found himself increasingly isolated, the burden of leadership weighing heavily on him. He spent long nights alone in the command center, reviewing battle plans, analyzing intelligence, and grappling with the difficult decisions that lay ahead. The pressure was immense, but he knew there was no turning back. Too much was at stake. In the days leading up to the first major engagement, the atmosphere on the homeworld was tense. The city that had once been filled with the sounds of construction and commerce was now eerily quiet, its streets lined with soldiers and defense installations. The citizens went about their daily lives with a sense of grim determination, knowing that the future of their species depended on the outcome of the coming battle. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. The enemy fleet had been detected on the outskirts of their territory, moving with the precision and discipline of a well-oiled machine. Eugene stood in the command center, surrounded by his closest advisors and the leaders of the allied species, all eyes fixed on the holographic display that showed the approaching armada. "Remember," Eugene said, his voice calm but firm, "we fight not just for ourselves, but for the future of every species in this galaxy. We cannot afford to fail." As the first wave of enemy ships entered the system, the Allied fleet moved into position. The humans had developed a new type of energy weapon, one that combined their own technology with that of their alien allies, and it was now their best hope for turning the tide. The ships bristled with these new weapons, their hulls glowing with energy as they powered up. The battle that followed was fierce and brutal, a clash of titanic forces that shook the very fabric of space. The Allied fleet fought with everything they had, but the enemy was relentless, their ships cutting through the defenses with terrifying efficiency. It quickly became clear that this was no ordinary enemy. They were prepared for every tactic, every maneuver, and they fought with a cold, calculating precision that left little room for error. Despite the odds, Eugene refused to give in to despair. He directed his forces with skill and determination, always staying one step ahead of the enemy, but it was a desperate fight. The Allied fleet was outnumbered, and their losses were mounting. For every enemy ship they destroyed, it seemed that 2 more took its place. But just as it seemed that all hope was lost, a breakthrough came. One of the human scientists, Dr. Wright, had been working on a last-ditch effort, a weapon so powerful that it could potentially turn the tide of the battle. It was risky, untested, and could just as easily destroy them all as it could the enemy. But with no other options left, Eugene made the decision to deploy it. The weapon was launched, a massive beam of energy that cut through space like a knife. For a moment, it seemed to have no effect, and then, with a blinding flash, it hit the center of the enemy fleet. The result was catastrophic. The enemy ships, caught in the blast, disintegrated in an instant, their advanced shielding and armor proving useless against the sheer power of the weapon. With their fleet decimated, the enemy was forced to retreat, their once unstoppable advance halted. The Allied forces, battered and bruised but still standing, let out a collective sigh of relief. They had won, but at a terrible cost. The battlefield was littered with the wreckage of both enemy and Allied ships, and the losses on both sides were staggering. As the dust settled, Eugene stood on the bridge of his command ship, looking out at the remnants of the battle. He knew that this was only the beginning. The enemy would regroup, they would come back stronger, and the war was far from over. But for now, they had bought themselves some time. Time to regroup, to rebuild, and to prepare for the battles yet to come. The victory had come at a great cost, and Eugene knew that the challenges ahead would only grow more difficult. But as he looked out over the battlefield, he felt a renewed sense of determination. They had faced the enemy and survived, and in doing so, they had shown that humanity and its allies were a force to be reckoned with. The road ahead would be long and filled with danger, but they would face it together, united in their resolve to protect their new home and secure their place in the galaxy. The war was far from over, but Eugene knew that as long as they stood together, there was hope for a brighter future. In the aftermath of the battle, the Allied forces began the arduous task of recovery and rebuilding. The battlefield, once a theater of destruction, was now a graveyard of ships, twisted metal and debris drifting silently in the void, a stark reminder of the price they had paid for their survival. Salvage crews were dispatched to recover what they could, scavenging parts and technology from the wreckage. It was a grim task, but a necessary one. Every resource was precious, and every piece of recovered technology could be the key to gaining an edge in the battles yet to come. Back on the homeworld, the atmosphere was somber. The victory, though hard-won, felt hollow in the face of the losses they had sustained. Families mourned the dead, and the city, which had once been filled with the sounds of construction and progress, was now quieter, subdued by the weight of grief. But life went on, and so did the preparations for the next phase of the war. There was no time to rest. They knew the enemy would not give them the luxury of time. Eugene Griffin found himself at the center of it all, his responsibilities growing with each passing day. The victory had solidified his position as the leader of the Allied forces, but it had also placed an enormous burden on his shoulders. He was no longer just the leader of a small band of human survivors. He was now a key figure in a galaxy-wide alliance, and the decisions he made would shape the future of countless species. The weight of this responsibility was almost overwhelming, but Eugene bore it with the same determination that had carried him through the darkest days of their awakening. In the weeks following the battle, Eugene and his team worked tirelessly to strengthen their defenses and prepare for the next confrontation. The energy weapon that had turned the tide of the battle was studied and refined, its power harnessed more safely and effectively. The Allied fleets were reorganized, new strategies were devised, and every effort was made to ensure that they would be ready when the enemy returned. Eugene knew that their next encounter with the enemy would be even more brutal than the last, and he was determined not to be caught off guard. At the same time, diplomatic efforts continued. The victory had drawn the attention of other species who had been sitting on the sidelines, watching to see how the conflict would unfold. Some were impressed by the resilience and ingenuity of the Allied forces and were now willing to join the fight. Others, however, saw the alliance as a threat and were quietly working to undermine it. Eugene spent countless hours in negotiations trying to strengthen their coalition while countering the efforts of those who sought to weaken it. It was a delicate balancing act, and one that required all of his skill and patience. As the weeks turned into months, a sense of urgency began to permeate the alliance. The enemy was regrouping, and intelligence reports indicated that they were preparing for a massive offensive. The scale of the upcoming battle was unlike anything they had faced before, and the stakes were higher than ever. Failure would mean not just the end of their alliance, but the possible extinction of their species. Eugene knew that they were running out of time, and every moment counted. In preparation for the coming storm, Eugene made a difficult decision. He ordered the construction of a massive, heavily fortified space station in orbit around their homeworld, a final bastion where they could make their last stand if all else failed. The station, named Haven, was designed to be both a command center and a sanctuary, capable of withstanding even the most powerful attacks. It was a symbol of their resolve, a statement to the galaxy that they would not go down without a fight. The construction of Haven became a rallying point for the Allied forces. It gave them a focus, something tangible to work towards in the face of the uncertainty and fear that gripped them all. The station grew rapidly, with resources and manpower being funneled into the project from across the galaxy. Engineers and scientists worked around the clock, pushing the limits of their technology to create something that could truly be their last hope. As the completion of Haven drew near, Eugene found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. The transformation of their small band of survivors into a formidable alliance was nothing short of miraculous, a testament to the strength and resilience of the human spirit. But it had come at a great cost. The battles they had fought, the lives they had lost, and the sacrifices they had made were etched into his soul. He had seen the best and the worst of humanity and their allies, and he knew that the trials they had faced so far were only the beginning. With Haven nearly complete, Eugene called for one final war council. The leaders of the Allied species gathered once more, this time in the newly constructed command center of the space station. The atmosphere was tense, the weight of what was to come hanging heavily in the air. Eugene stood before them, his expression resolute. "This is it," he said, his voice steady. "The enemy is coming, and they will throw everything they have at us. But we are ready. We have fought too hard and come too far to give up now. We stand united, and we will fight together until the end." The council members nodded in agreement, their expressions determined. They knew what was at stake, and they were prepared to do whatever it took to protect their people and their future. The plans were finalized, orders were given, and the Allied forces began to move into position. As the enemy fleet approached, Haven bristled with activity. The space station, now fully operational, was a fortress in every sense of the word. Its shields were the strongest ever constructed, its weapons the most advanced, and its corridors filled with soldiers ready to defend it with their lives. Eugene stood on the bridge, watching as the enemy ships came into view. The final battle was about to begin, and there was no turning back. The enemy struck with a ferocity that shook Haven to its core. Waves of fighters and capital ships descended upon the station, their weapons pounding against the shields in a relentless assault. The Allied fleet, positioned around Haven, fought back with everything they had. The battle was intense, chaotic, and brutal, with ships being destroyed on both sides in a matter of seconds. The sky above the homeworld was lit up with the flashes of explosions, the debris of destroyed vessels raining down on the planet below. Eugene directed the battle from the command center, his voice calm and authoritative as he issued orders and made split-second decisions. The enemy was overwhelming in their numbers and firepower, but Haven held strong. The new weapons they had developed proved their worth, cutting through the enemy ships with devastating efficiency. But the battle was far from won. The enemy was relentless, their determination matched only by their cruelty. As the battle raged on, a new threat emerged. The enemy had deployed a superweapon, a massive construct designed to breach Haven's shields and destroy the station from within. It was a doomsday device, one that could turn the tide of the battle in an instant. Eugene knew that they had to stop it, or everything they had worked for would be lost. He ordered a strike team to be assembled, the best soldiers from each allied species, and sent them on a desperate mission to infiltrate the enemy vessel and disable the superweapon. It was a suicide mission, and everyone knew it, but there was no other choice. The team boarded a small, heavily shielded shuttle and launched towards the enemy ship, disappearing into the chaos of the battle. Minutes felt like hours as Eugene and the others waited for word from the strike team. The battle continued to rage around them, with Haven's shields beginning to falter under the relentless assault. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost, a transmission came through. "We've reached the core," came the voice of the team leader, strained but determined. "We're setting the charges now." The next few moments were a blur. The superweapon, now rigged with explosives, detonated in a brilliant flash of light. The enemy ship was torn apart from the inside, and with it, the threat of the superweapon was eliminated. The Allied forces, spurred on by this victory, renewed their efforts, pushing the enemy back with a ferocity that matched their own. The battle reached its climax, with Haven and the Allied fleet delivering a devastating blow to the enemy forces. The tide had turned, and the enemy, now leaderless and disorganized, began to retreat. The remnants of their fleet scattered, fleeing into the darkness of space. The battle was over, and the Allied forces had won. As the last of the enemy ships disappeared from the scanners, a wave of relief washed over Haven. The cost had been high, but they had survived. The Allied leaders gathered on the bridge of Haven, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and triumph. They had done the impossible. They had stood against a seemingly unstoppable force and emerged victorious. Eugene stood among them, his heart heavy with the knowledge of all they had lost, but also filled with pride for all they had achieved. The war was not yet over. There would be more battles to fight, more enemies to face. But they had proven that they were capable of standing their ground, of defending their new home and their place in the galaxy. As the Allied fleet began the long process of recovery and rebuilding, Eugene allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He knew that the challenges ahead would be no less daunting than those they had already faced. But he also knew that they were stronger now, stronger in their unity, stronger in their resolve, and stronger in their belief that they could shape their own destiny. The future was uncertain, but for the first time since their awakening, Eugene felt a sense of hope. They had survived the darkest of days, and now they stood on the brink of a new era, one that they would build.